Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Angie Viscianen, and I'm the founder of Leg Up Legal. We provide a pre-law mentoring program that connects prospective law students to attorneys for mentoring. And we started doing these Zoom meetups every Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon to allow students to connect with each other and to connect with lawyers and law school admissions consultants and folks who can give you some information that might help you through these very challenging and uncertain times. So today I have a very special guest with me. Angela Vorpahl is the founder and creator of her own YouTube channel and the creator of the Law School Master Plan. And she is here to talk to you guys today about how to avoid the worst law school advice. So yes. Angela, I'll let you take it away.
All right. Hey guys, happy Thursday. So pumped that you guys are here. Before we get started, just to get an idea for where everyone's coming from, can you guys put in the chat, you'll see a chat box in the lower bar of Zoom, and let me know where you are in your law school process. So are you currently in law school, a rising 1L, or in the LSAT application process? Just so I kind of get an idea for where everybody is. Okay. Hey, Bree says rising 2L. Barbara says rising 1L, class of 2020 grad. Oh, cool. Okay.
And hey, Saloni.
Huh?
Saloni, I know her. She's been interacting with me on LinkedIn.
Anthony says, I'm about to be a senior. I'm in LSAT application process. Cool. Class of 2022, rising 4th year, LSAT application process, rising 1L, university, rising 2L. Okay. So good, so a really cool mix. Okay. Junior, rising junior, LSAT application process. Okay, cool. So we're going to start, then I'm going to definitely assume nothing and we'll start from the base and work our way up just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys. All right, great. So today what we're talking about is the worst law school advice out there and how to avoid it. And what we just went through, but I wanted to see where everybody was in terms of what you've kind of heard about law school or what advice you may have heard up until this point. And so it sounds like, a few of you guys are already in law school, a few of you are headed into law school, and some are still in the application process. So we'll definitely, take it from the bottom and work our way up. And just to give you guys an idea of who I am, so my name is Angela Vorpahl, and kind of what Angie was saying, I'm a YouTuber, I'm an early legal career coach, and to give you a little bit of background, I started law school in 2008. I went straight from undergrad, and then I graduated law school in 2011 from SMU Law in Dallas, Texas. And so I've been, from the beginning of law school till now, it's been 12 years, which is crazy to think about. But to give you a little bit of background on my trajectory, the first year out of law school, I worked for a federal judge for a year. And then I worked as an IP litigator in New York for 5 years. And then I actually moved down to Argentina because my partner is Argentine. And so that's when I started into the human rights world and started getting introduced to that and learning how that worked and sort of the different opportunities that were there. Started taking on a lot of pro bono cases, and that was fantastic. And I'm still pursuing that, still in that world. But during that time, so this has been about 2 years ago, a couple things were happening at the time. So I realized that I actually felt pretty distant from the US legal community, which is sort of interesting because I didn't know that I would feel that much of a loss from feeling isolated from a community I didn't even know that I cared so much about being a part of, but I definitely did. And so at the time I was trying to think of ways that I could connect back with people in the US. And around that same time, I was becoming infatuated with YouTube, which I know is like very late in the game, but I loved YouTube for the first time as like an idea of creating educational content. So I'd always use YouTube to watch like music videos and short like comedy sketches. But that's when it first occurred to me, and like I started really using YouTube to find answers to questions and problems and things. So that's how that started. And then at the same time, when I kind of realized that that's what YouTube could be used for, I started thinking, okay, well, what could I teach? Because I've always had this, idea of how amazing it would be to be a professor of something, but then also, people who are professors always complain about like how the students don't really want to learn, or how you have to grade exams, or like all the negative aspects of being a professor. And I was like, well, what if I just created content for people who wanted to learn it? And the only people that would have to watch these videos are people that wanted to. And then if you don't, you just click off. And that's amazing. Like what an incredible connection that you can have with people, and then they can ask questions and put comments and things like that. So that's how the YouTube channel was born. And around that time, I'd always felt really strongly, as I was making my way through my legal career, about how nobody tells anybody anything. Like, you start out in law school, I had no idea what law school entailed, or how to get good grades, or how to get hired. And then you start off as a young lawyer, and nobody tells you how to do your job, because law school doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer. And you're kind of thrown in, and the advice consistently is, oh, well, you just need to do it for like 3 years and then you'll get the hang of it. And I just thought, I mean, yeah, I guess, right? You can do anything for 3 to 5 years and eventually get the hang of it. But I really felt like we could do better, like
I can totally vouch for that. I was like, I just paid $100,000 for this law degree, and I feel like it's useless. So like, why are we doing it this way?
Oh my God, it's insane. Like you don't learn the day-to-day of how to be a lawyer. It's just like the base level foundation of various types of law. And so basically you get in, most people, their first job is with a law firm. And so you get into these law firms and they just start assigning you things. And the hope is that you find somebody that's a mentor. And I know this is a huge passion project of Angie's, but it's like, hopefully you find somebody that teaches you, or you just sink and you feel like you're going to get fired every day, And so I felt so strongly about helping young lawyers in that position, so that basically all the information that I wish I would have known at the time is what I wanted to teach people. So that's how the YouTube channel was born. And then over the last 2 years, the channel turns 2 in October, I was getting a lot of questions, a lot of comments, a lot of people asking for advice. And what I was realizing, and couple things. Like, one, I loved answering the questions. Like, it was such a high for me. It was so much fun. And then the other thing I realized was that the videos, are as helpful, I think, as they can be, they're also sort of individual islands on their own, right? They're like individual topic areas that are interesting, or that I think are really important, but they don't have sort of a systemic structure. And so when I realized that's what was happening, I decided to create a program that walked people through exactly how to be successful in law school and be successful as a young lawyer. So that's what I do now. I'm an early legal career coach, which covers law school and then people like 0 to 3 years out of law school. So it's been a fun ride. These last 12 years, like, definitely not what I would have expected for myself. But to be completely honest, I didn't have really any expectations, because I didn't know that. And that's like one of the problems, right? I didn't even know what the options were or what I wanted to do. And so fast forward to today, and that's why I focus on those topics. I feel very strongly about them, and they're really fun. And so today, what we're specifically going to be talking about is the top 5 pieces of worst law school advice, because it's crazy to me that this stuff is still out there and people still say it. And I think one of the toughest things about being a law student is that you get lots of advice from lots of different people, and at times it's conflicting and it's contradictory, and you don't really know who to listen to. And it's a lot of times it's incomplete. And so this is just to make your lives more difficult, to give you additional advice, to confuse you further. But no, I do hope it's helpful. I do hope that it resonates with you guys. And I'll explain why I think this is terrible advice, and then what I would recommend doing instead. And as you guys have questions, like, this is very, very informal. And so feel free to write them in the chat box, and we can kind of talk about them either one by one as we go, or at the end, just kind of as you have them, just throw them in the chat box, and we can talk about them. Okay, so the first worst piece of law school advice I would say is to prepare extensively for cold calls. And the reason that this is a terrible piece of advice is that in basically every law school course, your grade is determined 100% by a single final exam at the end of the semester. And so that means that cold calls are not going to have an impact on your grade. Caveat to this, there are a few students that reached out to me that said, well, actually, a couple of professors have said that they give grade bumps for class participation, or it's like 5% of your grade or something. And occasionally you'll hear a professor say that. But 2 things. One, if you have a baseline preparation, which we'll talk about in a second, you're going to be fine for class participation. And 2, you have to understand that a 2 to 5% of your grade is a very, very, very insignificant amount. It's a tiny, tiny amount in comparison to the final exam, which is going to be, in those situations, 95% of your grade, but in most situations, 100%. So don't fall prey to like I think what the professors try to do is make a tiny percent of your grade, in some cases, be class participation, so people actually read the reading. But it's not. It's basically insignificant in terms of the overall grade percentage. So don't worry about that. But just to make sure that we're all on the same page, what cold calls are is if you can kind of picture, if you're going to walk into a law school classroom and you've been assigned reading for that class and you've been assigned cases to read, when you sit down, the professor, generally speaking, isn't just going to get up there and start lecturing, meaning they're not just going to get up there and say, okay, well, this is the case you guys read, and these are the facts, and this was what the court held, and this was the analysis the court went through, and this is the reason that you guys read this case. This is the takeaway, and this is what you need to know from it. Instead of like that lecture style, the way that law professors love to teach is what's known as the Socratic method. And so what they'll do instead is you'll all sit down and they'll have a list of people in the class, or they'll have like a seating chart, and they'll randomly call on somebody, and they'll just say like, Miss Jordan, tell us the facts, or tell us about the case, like Williams versus Harry. And then you're gonna be expected to give an overview of the case. So the basic facts of the case, what the holding was, what the legal rule was, what the analysis of the court was, and why. And as you're going through this like high-level presentation of what you read, the professor is going to interrupt you and start asking you hypothetical questions. And this is like where the Socratic method kind of kicks in. And so he or she is going to start peppering you with basically fact hypos. So if this fact were different, how would the court have held? Or if this fact didn't exist, how do you think that would have impacted the court's analysis? Like basically trying to get you to think through, why did a court rule the way they did, and what facts were important to them, and things like that. And so as you can imagine, this can be terrifying because a lot of professors will do it randomly. So you never know when you could be on the hot seat, which means you could be on the hot seat any day of the semester. And so you feel this pressure to be prepared every single day. And then you're also presenting, you're answering these in-depth questions in front of a group of like 100 people that are in your class. And so you don't want to look foolish. You don't want to look like you don't know what you're talking about. And so that creates a lot of pressure. And so the way that a lot of people try to avoid kind of that terrifying feeling or inevitability is that they over allocate time in preparing for class. So they over allocate time on taking notes on the reading, and they over allocate time on rereading the cases or rereading their notes to prepare for class. And then they under allocate time on the other studying steps. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest problems and the biggest mistakes that law students make. And it's not your fault. It's, they put a lot of pressure on these situations. And in a lot of cases, you don't even know that there are other things to be doing. And so that's one of the toughest habits, I think, to break yourself out of, is to realize, like, one, these cold calls, however well I do, are going to have 0% effect on my grade, or a very, very, very minimal effect on my grade. And two, if you do the reading and you do basic reading notes and you don't double up and you don't duplicate and you don't reread cases and things, you're going to have a base level understanding to get through the class and get your participation grade, if that's even at issue. And so it can be really, really tough, and it can be tough to break yourself of that habit.
I completely agree with that, because when you're trying to get into the swing of law school, like, they're throwing things at you so quickly that you don't know how to prioritize things. And I think the most frustrating thing about your first year is you feel like you're doing all the things and you have no idea what is effective. And so you're literally, it just feels like you're in a dark room and you're just, running until you bump into a wall, and then you run until you bump into another wall, and you just have no idea if anything that you're doing is effective. And I also completely agree that students tend to get really, really scared of the cold calls. So they way over prepare for that. And like, I didn't start preparing for my final exams until probably about a month before my final exams is when I actually started trying to condense my class notes into like a manageable outline. and that was already like way too late. So, so I just felt like I didn't have enough time to condense everything and process everything. Because when you're going through case by case, it's hard to see how it all fits into the big picture and what you're trying to actually learn throughout the entire semester. And if you don't have an outline or a commercial outline or something to compare that off of, you might find yourself with, 45 case briefs and you have no idea what you've actually really learned in those 45 case briefs.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, and that's one of the problems too. And you have to kind of keep it in perspective because, in a perfect world, if you had one case to read and you had a week to prepare that one case, then you could create the perfect case brief and the perfect class presentation and all of that. But you have to understand that this stuff is coming so fast and furious that you are reading, 5 to 10 cases a night and being expected to have a base level understanding of what those cases are for the next day. And so I think it's important to put sort of the pressure that you're putting on yourself or the expectations you're putting on yourself in perspective. If you have 10 cases to read for a night for 3 classes the next day, you should expect that you will have a baseline understanding and that is it. If you try to have a deeper understanding, what you're going to wind up doing is pouring so much time into preparing for those presentations and preparing for those notes that you're going to lose sight of the fact that that is one step of 5 and it's the most insignificant step. And so, you got to lower your expectations of yourself and of your performance and start setting what would be considered a successful cold call is just getting through it, honestly. Getting through it. It's okay if you're embarrassed. It's okay if you don't know all the answers to the questions. You're not expected to. It's not going to affect your grade. Embarrassment lasts momentarily. And honestly, everybody else in the classroom is just thinking, I'm so glad they're not calling on me. Like that's all anybody else is thinking. Nobody thinks you're stupid. Nobody thinks that you're a slacker. Like that is the only thing they're thinking.
And so by the time second semester, everyone's so used to feeling like that already. They're like, oh you were just, it happens, buddy. Happens to the best of us.
And it's like one of these things where you can't let a feeling, like the feeling of being embarrassed or the feeling of people judging you, which is all in your head, by the way, but like you can't let the feeling dictate how you're going to allocate your time, especially when you know that allocation of time is inefficient and is not going to get you to your goal, which is doing really well in the final exam. So it's tough. And one of the other things that I have here is that, kind of what Angie was saying is like, you don't know what you're supposed to be doing. And like per your professor, the only thing you're being assigned are class notes or reading notes. So you have pages and you have cases that you're assigned and that's it. They do not tell you to take class notes. They don't tell you to outline. They don't assign canned answers. They don't assign practice exams. And so, from if you haven't heard anything else, and you come from, like a type A, straight A type mentality, it's like, yeah, man, I'm going to read the crap out of these cases and I'm going to prepare the crap out of them because all I know is that they're going to be asked about, they're going to potentially ask me about them in class. And so that's where the problem comes in. And it's really a lack of information. And I totally blame the professors and the system for all of this. But kind of what we were talking about, you have to focus on what the goal of law school is because law school is absolutely an investment. It's an investment of 3 years of time. It's an investment of at least $150,000. It's an investment of a lot of resources. And so you have to ask yourself what it is you're trying to get out of it. What are you trying to get out of this investment? And for most people, the answer is to get the best job you possibly can upon graduation, whatever that means for you. And practically speaking, if we're being 100% honest, the best way to open the most amount of doors right out of law school is to get the highest grades that you possibly can. And that especially applies to 1L year. You're going to have so many more opportunities the higher that you can rank in your class, especially after 1L year. And logistically, what that means is that you want to invest your time in the studying steps that are going to get you there, that are going to get you those highest grades. And unfortunately, preparing extensively for cold calls is not going to be the most effective use of your time. And time is a finite resource, which means like if you are pouring tons and tons of extra hours into preparing for class, that means you're not pouring the hours into a different study step that can move the ball forward faster. So I don't know, I guess I should ask if there's any questions on this. And if not, we can hold questions to the end. But did anybody ask any specific questions about this, Angie?
They did ask, though, for your YouTube channel. So I dropped your link for your YouTube channel in the chat box.
Yeah, YouTube.com/Angela Vorpahl. Check it out. Lots of good free content. So, and if you guys ever have a question about something I haven't covered in a video, just ask me in a comment. And I have an ongoing list of videos that I want to create. So you can always just leave a comment or DM me on Instagram or something, and I'll add it to the list. So the second worst piece of law school advice, and this is the most controversial thing I'll say today, and I love so much that lawyers are such nerds that this is like a very hot topic, but I love it. Like, I could talk about this all day. I feel so strongly about it. I think it's so interesting. And honestly, like, I understand why people disagree, but I think it's funny that it's like a topic that continues to be talked about and continues to be brought up. And so from my perspective, one of the worst things that you can tell a law student to do, or tell a law student, is that handwriting is just as good as typing, or even worse than that, that handwriting is better than typing. Especially when we're talking about reading notes, so the notes you're taking on your reading, and class notes. And the reason is that when you're handwriting, and I have to move this screen down, but when you're handwriting, you cannot get as much information down on the page. You can't integrate the material as you go. You can't synthesize and manipulate the information as easily later on, and you can't get the practice reps for final exams. And so just so you guys know, the reason that this is a really controversial topic is because in 2014, there was a study that came out by two professors that compared two groups of people, one that took handwritten notes based on a lecture and a group that typed their notes based on a lecture. And what they found was that, based on this study, that people who took handwritten notes were comprehending the material better than the people who were taking typed notes when they were tested right after the lecture and then a week after the lecture. And there's a couple of problems with this when you talk about law school. And the main one is that, as we just mentioned, law school grades are 100% a final exam at the end of the semester, meaning that when you are taking notes, you are prepping 4 months in the future. So you're not prepping for a quiz at the end of class. You're not prepping for a final at the end of the week. You're prepping for this huge monster exam that's happening at the very end of the semester. And so I just think that that's very misleading when you're talking about who's comprehending the information best in a very short period of time, because that's not the goal. The goal isn't to fully understand what it is you're learning right at that moment. The goal is to be able to use that information and synthesize it and distill it down so that you can then apply it on a final exam 4 months in the future. And so one of the things that, we'll kind of go through these problems one by one and why, and I actually don't know. I'm actually curious. So before I like defend this to the death, I kind of want to know where you guys stand. So type in the comment box, either handwriting or typing, as to what you either do now or you're leaning towards or you feel strongly about. Like, which camp are you guys in? I want to see if I'm trying to convert people or if everybody is like already on the bandwagon.
Everybody's saying typing.
Oh, okay. Well, then actually what I'm going to be doing is
somebody said that they have a reusable notebook where they like scan and photograph.
Yeah, I know. I've seen that. I've heard about that. Okay, cool. Well, basically what I'm going to be doing then is convincing you guys to not be swayed by the handwriters, because and like the people who are handwriting, like, my only goal here is to help you do the best that you possibly can in law school. And so if you want to take the advice, take it. If you are dead set on handwriting and that's the only way you can process information, like that is completely your choice, your decision. And so don't feel like you have to change. I just want to give you guys all of the information so that you can make an informed decision.
Oh, hey, the latecomers all said handwriting.
Well, and that's great. And it's cool because like when I was in college, I think I handwrote everything. I don't think I started typing till law school.
But I also feel like, Angela, for our classes, like I know predominantly it seemed like, everybody had a laptop by the third year, but in the first year, I don't think there were that many people that had laptops. Most of us were handwriting.
Handwriters. I mean, the reason I remember a lot of people on laptops is because you would see, it was so funny. Like you would see people right in front of you, like watching cat videos and then like pulling up the news and stuff. So like one of my best friends in the world, she was like sitting right in front of me, I think it was, and she just always had LOL cats on. And so like it was hysterical because like anytime I needed a break, I would just like look at her screen. But yeah, and so like if for example, like this is sort of I guess on topic ish, but like one of the things that people will argue all the time, and the reason I want to kind of arm you guys with this information is because you'll get a lot of pushback, mainly from professors, because there's like this wave of professors who want to try to ban laptops and say that, you know, you're not comprehending the information as well, so you're not processing it as well. You're being distracted because, of course, you're like checking email and checking news sources and Facebook and stuff. And so if you're in that camp where you get distracted really easily, then just turn off your Wi-Fi, right? Like that's a very easy fix. Just turn off your Wi-Fi so you can't access that stuff. And then if you get distracted by people around you looking at that, then just sit in like the front row, and then you don't have to look at anybody else's screens, right? So those are very easy workarounds that I would argue are not good enough reasons not to type your notes.
Well, and the other ridiculous thing about this all is, okay, so if the thought is you're supposed to be preparing for a career, like you're an adult, you know that when you're at work, you're going to have access to a computer. Are you going to be on Facebook all day on that computer, or are you going to be doing, billable work? Like you're going to be doing billable work.
Yeah.
Hopefully. So
you have to like train yourself to focus.
Yeah, train yourself now to focus because, you're preparing for this hopefully long career in the law, right?
Yeah. No, yeah, totally. And one of the things, and it's just so interesting because I actually just listened to, and the reason I wanted to talk about this today is because this isn't just because the study came out in 2014, it's not really old news. Like I just heard a podcast of two people defending to the death handwritten notes based on this study, which I don't think is applicable to the law school context at all. And it was funny because both of them went to law school, both of them typed their notes in law school, and then they were arguing for why it's better to handwrite. So I want to give you guys as much information as possible so you can make the decision that's best for you. But these are the reasons that I think typing is so much more superior. And the first one is that when you handwrite, you can't get as much information down. So just physically, you cannot, and this isn't, I think this is a completely accepted truth, but you cannot handwrite as fast as you can type. And so the idea is that when you're handwriting, your brain has to process the information because it can't take a transcript style notes. And so you have to put things in your own words and you have to summarize and things like that, which is great for the short term. But the problem is for the long term, you're not getting as much information down. And when we talk about what are the valuable steps of the studying process, the reading notes are your first introduction to the material and you're taking notes on what you think is important. But in class, the professor is telling you what's most important. Like he or she has an outline of what the lecture is going to be that day, of all the important points to hit, to tell you what the takeaways are, to tell you what the important facts are, the important legal rules. And so what your professor is telling you is golden. It is golden, golden, golden information because the outlines that they're using to lecture to you are the same outlines they're going to be using to create the final exam. Like they're going to have them right there. And then as they create the fact pattern, they're hitting on all of those different elements. And so you want to get down everything that's coming out of your professor's mouth. Even if you don't understand it at the time, that's fine. You don't have to understand it. It's really dense material. It's very confusing and contradictory at times, but you do want to get it down so that you can use it later. And so I think one of the problems with handwriting is that you're forcing yourself to self-edit because you can't get it all down. And so there are things that you are not including that I think is a really high ask of a 1L especially, to know the material well enough that you're learning for the very first time in a language that is brand new to tell yourself what to include and what not to include. And so I think a much, much better approach is to get it all down, and then you can decide later on as you're synthesizing what can be cut out and what can't. But you don't even give yourself a chance if you don't get all of that information down. The other problem with handwriting is that you can't integrate the material as you go. And I wish I had included a clip so I can show you guys the difference. But when I was in my first semester, I had two separate sets of notes, which when you're handwriting, you're definitely going to have. Whereas I had all of my, my reading notes, my case briefs on one page, and then I had all of my class notes on a separate page. And what wound up happening is when I went to go outline, then I had two separate sets of notes and I had to read through both to sort of figure out what was the most important takeaway or what should be included in my outline. And so it basically doubled all the work that I had to do. And so when you're typing in class, you can integrate the material as you go. So as you're taking class notes, a couple of the things that I teach my students is you put it in a different color. So you put it in red, what the professor is saying, so your eye can easily see what is a lecture note and versus what is your own personal reading note. And then you also insert the material where it belongs. So if your professor is talking about the legal rules, you jump down to the legal rules section. If he or she is talking about the facts, you jump up to the facts section. If they're talking about policy, you create a separate section for policy. So at the end of class, you have this completely integrated set of notes that is already, it's not outlined per se, but it's the step towards outlining that you don't have to do, and you don't have to take the time after class to do it. The other cool thing is when you're typing, you can also emphasize material that's really important. And so when your professor is like very strongly indicating something's important, either he or she is saying it over and over, or they straight up tell you this is the rule for contract formation or something like that, then you can indicate that to your future self by doing things like bolding, underlining, highlighting, like telling yourself, hey, this has to make it into my outline. This is the biggest rule. This is the biggest takeaway. And those kind of sort of manipulation tactics of the material you can't do in your handwriting. And I guess you could put like an asterisk next to it, but it's not nearly as easy, and you can't have like differentiations, right? So for me, for example, what I would do is if something was like pretty important, I would underline it. If it was very important, I would underline it and bold it. And then if it was like insanely important, I would underline, bold, and highlight it all in real time. And so I could see very easily, okay, here's the hierarchy of importance and what needs to make it into the next studying step. The other, when we're talking about, following studying steps, which the next one is outlining, the other problem when you handwrite, one thing is you have to usually do a second step, which is either digitizing it or you have to like type it out word for word. And even if you were to digitize it, so typing it out word for word obviously takes a whole nother step that you are now adding to your study schedule, which, time is your most valuable, most finite resource. So that's not an effective use of your time. And even if you digitize it, you can't synthesize and manipulate it as easily later on. So when you're outlining and you have your class notes and reading notes on one side and you have an outline you're about to create on the other side of your screen, you can do things like what I call copy and paste plus, which is where you are not literally typing word for word in your outline, retyping what it is you have in your class notes. You can copy and paste it, and then you can manipulate it to a way that makes more sense to you. Sometimes that includes putting it in your own words. Sometimes that includes putting bullet points, flow charts, tables, like whatever it takes to make the most sense to you. But if you're handwriting it, the only option you have is to retype it all again. And I would argue that's a very, very inefficient use of your time. And then the other thing that we talked about is that you're not getting practice reps for the final exam. And so I don't think anybody out there is saying or arguing that you should not be typing your final exam. Like the deal with the final exams is that it's timed. It's going to be 2 hours or 3 hours, depending on the length of the course. And it's doing well on a final exam is just as much about knowing the information and applying the information substantively as it is just about a flat out race. Because, and I don't think we mentioned this yet, but the law school courses are graded on a curve, which means you can't just know and apply the information well. If you want to get an A or an A- in the course, you're talking about beating out 85% of the people in the class, which is a huge percentage. And so when you can kind of picture sitting in a big room, 100 students taking this final exam, you are trying to get as many things on the page, substantively correct, of course, but like as many things on the page as you possibly can, because those are all points. Because what the professor is going to do is they're going to print out your final exam once you've typed it, once they're ready to grade. Then they're going to have an outline of all of the points, issues, rules, facts, arguments, all these things. And then they're going to look at your final and they're literally going to go through and say, that's a point, that's a point, that's a point, that's a point. And the more points you can get, the higher your overall score is going to be. And then they have to allocate the scores based on the curve. So, like 15% get A's or A minuses, 20 to 25% get like C's and lower, and then everybody else gets in the B range, like B, B minus, B plus. And so if you want to break out of the B pack, then you have to be able to get more points on the page than anybody else. And you're just putting yourself at a crazy disadvantage if you're handwriting. And so it doesn't seem like it at the time, but like as you're taking reading notes, as you're taking class notes, as you're outlining, and all of this stuff is typed, you are getting so much faster at typing, even though they're in increments and you don't realize it. And that's going to be a huge, huge, huge advantage on final exams over somebody who's not doing that day in and day out. Did I convince anybody? Anybody who's a handwriter, did I convince you to change over to typing? It's so crazy how strongly I feel about this. But if you don't...
Actually,
It's
we had a
not.
couple of questions, and
Yeah.
so they asked, is the final exam the only grade for the entire class?
Yes.
Well, for most classes, but sometimes
Yes.
there's some law schools that have midterms for 1L classes to make it a little more gentle, but your midterms are usually worth a negligible amount, like maybe 15% or less.
Oh, crazy.
So, yeah, so there are some law schools that offer midterm just to ease people into the first semester, or maybe even in the second semester of 1L, but they're usually worth a very, very small percentage just to like get your feet wet.
And do you know how many law schools actually do that? Like,
A
are we
good
talking
number now
like
because
half?
people, I wouldn't say half, maybe a little less than half, but there
Gotcha.
are also some law schools that have like way more I don't know, way more gentle curriculums. You'll find this at a lot of like kind of the smaller regional schools where they do have like regular exams and regular assignments just like undergrad. But it's
No
those
way.
are
Oh my
way
gosh, that's
fewer.
brand new
I
then.
only know of like 3 of those.
And are they still graded on a curve though?
They're all still graded on a curve, but they just
Yeah.
have way more grades. So there's more checkpoints in the
Yeah.
semester.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's so interesting.
Yeah, so instead of having one final exam, they might have like 4 mini exams.
Oh, that's crazy. Is I guess like is anybody on the call who's currently a 2L or a rising 2L or rising 3L? Do you just to get a sense like did you guys have midterms or did you guys have multiple exams or were you guys all like the 100% final exam groups? I'm just curious. For us, we were 100% final exams. We didn't have any participation or any midterms or anything like that.
Bree said she had a midterm in one class. I
You
had
had midterm.
midterms in all of my first year classes.
You did?
Yeah, I did.
Oh,
Yeah,
crazy.
but they were only worth like a super small amount. Some of them were worth like 5%, some of them were worth 10, some of them were worth 15. But
And did you go through the whole studying process? Like, did you do, reading notes, class notes, outlines, practice exams to prepare for that? Or did you like wait till the
I
end of
did
the
the
semester to do it all?
second semester. First semester,
Yeah.
I didn't know up from down. So
Yeah, yeah.
when midterms hit first semester, I was a hot mess. So like,
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't
First
even
semester is
remember what I
crazy
did. I
because
don't
you
even
don't know
remember what I did, to be
anything.
honest. Yeah, you don't know anything.
Yeah.
And so, but it was interesting because when they do that, when they sandwich a midterm in between, you see a couple of weird phenomenon happen. First, people who blew away the midterm, even though it's worth a negligible amount, decide like, oh, I'm getting this stuff, and
Oh,
apparently I don't need to try as hard. And
no.
then they stop trying.
Oh,
And then the people
no.
who like bombed the midterm, even though it's a
Yeah.
negligible amount, some of them just give up at that point. And
Yeah.
then some of them are like, okay, I gotta get this show on the road, and then
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it
they
has like
catch
the
up.
opposite effect it's intended to,
Yeah,
basically.
so you have this weird like tortoise and hare situation in
Yeah.
the class whenever there are midterms. Like
Gotcha.
when there's a final exam, there's no way for you to figure out where you are, where you
Mhm.
stand. So I think
Well,
everybody's just kind of rushing to the end.
well,
But when there's a midterm, it forces everybody to measure themselves against everyone else, which is just honestly
yeah.
the worst thing about law school.
Yeah. Well, which is also crazy because like you said, I mean, I guess that's good for the majority of people because maybe it sort of forces them to like step it up a notch, but then the people who do well, if it has the opposite effect, I don't know. I guess it depends on who it is and how they take it, but yeah, they might just start coasting. Oh no. Don't coast, guys. Don't coast if you do well on your midterm. Keep it going. Did I convert anybody on the handwriting thing? Is anybody like
I don't
all
see any
over typing
conversion.
now?
Some people are saying that they use like dictation and transcription tools too to like
Ooh,
record a class,
cool.
like dragon dictation or
Or
um,
like as the professor is talking, it's just voice recognition and you're getting all of it down.
yeah, I want to actually mention something about that because I thought that that would help me, and I did have a dictation tool when
Yeah.
but the problem is one, it's giving you too much information. So like you do need to take some time to condense all of that down. And then two, like the things that are happening in class when you're doing Socratic method and the professor's jumping around from person to person to person, you're
Yeah.
gonna be getting all of the garbledy-gook coming
Right.
out of all of the other students
Like
too.
the bad answers or the bad hypos.
Exactly. So when he starts the Socratic method part, if your professor is not a person that actually does do a good job of trying to, give you an outline and then telling you, how does the student's response fit into the outline, then you're not really getting that in your dictation.
Right.
You're getting...
Well, and also, and I also imagine that like with the dictation, you can't do the integration step, right? So you're just getting a wall of text, and so you can't put it where you want it, and you can't I guess it depends on how quickly it's coming and if you can do two things at once. But if you're just typing it, then you can like jump down and put it under this category and change it to red and highlight it. And, so like you do miss that step too, the integration step.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I did audio record a lot of the lectures, and like I would go back through my notes and like kind of as I was synthesizing my notes into my outline, kind of listen to the lectures just in the background, because then whenever he did do some emphasis on something that, I was like, oh, I missed that emphasis. Like the first time around, that's when I would go back through my notes and like bold stuff and stuff. But so I think the audio did help a little bit, but I didn't use it to necessarily just like transcribe a whole new set of notes. Like I just kind of used it in the background to make sure that I caught anything that I didn't catch before.
Yeah, and the only thing, I guess the only thing that I would say about recording it and then listening to it later is to the extent that you don't have to do that, then you can like skip that entire step, right? Like if you can get it all down within like the 2 hours of class or the 3 hours of class, then you don't have to duplicate it later on. And I think, because like, I don't know, I think it's tough because I think I said this on one call, but somebody explained law school as a gas, so that it just keeps expanding in the room that you let it. And so I think that the sort of, I don't know, the sort of rub I have with like audio recordings, I guess, and maybe even maybe this applies to transcriptions too, is that like you could re-listen to lectures, you could reread cases, like there is going to be a slight advantage to anytime you review material, but in terms of like how to allocate your time as a whole, like globally, it's going to have diminishing return as opposed to like moving on to the next step.
You don't want to. You don't want to fill up your time with all of that. I completely agree. That's why with the dictation, I'm like, it's just giving you too much information. And I didn't use dictation, but that's, for those of you guys who do, that would be my only hesitation, would be you're not able to do the integration step as it's happening. Unless you can like copy and paste and manipulate as you go, then maybe, but that would be my only hesitation. I think Emily also asked a question about the F model. She said she thought that the laptop ban was because of the F model of reading it for afterwards. I don't know what the F model is.
I don't know what the F model is.
So, Emily, you want to chime in and clarify for us?
Yeah, let us know.
So, the way my undergraduate professor of education explained it is when you are reading something on a computer versus, for example, like a paper book, you read the first line, or line or two, and you'll read like from left to right the whole line. And then when you're doing typed notes, you'll like start to read like the fourth or fifth line, and it'll be like half the line. And like the shape of the letter F is how you read when you're reading on a computer screen, as opposed to the whole like left to right text when you have like a block of text when you're reading on paper.
I've never heard that.
Basically, like you start to read less and less on each line when you're reading on a screen.
You mean like actually reading, or like the level of comprehension is decreasing on a screen versus on hard copy? Maybe is that?
I think the former.
The former, like you're just not reading it at all.
Yeah. So like you have to, I guess, put in more effort, like the reading comprehension on the LSAT, because that's what I'm doing right now. You have to like put more effort reading the whole line.
I see.
As you go down the screen.
So what you're saying is your question, if you're typing notes, when you then go to synthesize them for your outline, the fear is that you're not reading each line of your notes?
So like you'd have to print them out basically when you're a week before the finals or whatever, to actually like sit there and read them through like left to right,
Right.
the entire line.
So what I would say is that, and I think we talk about this in maybe the next one, but when you're talking about outlining and what that process actually looks like, you physically have to go line by line. And so it's not just like, it's not reading it in terms of like reading it for memorization. It's not just like, oh, I am reviewing what it is that I wrote in class or what I wrote for my case brief. You're actually manipulating the information. Like you're actually taking it and you're actually physically either rewriting it or putting it in bullet points or making a flowchart. Like you're actually doing things with the material. And so I would not be afraid of missing it, like not reading it, because you're not just reading it, you're actually using it, like you're changing it, if that makes sense.
So it's like a new product, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, you're creating a totally new work product every time you go through these steps. Exactly. Does that convince you? And I wish I had like some visuals that I could show you guys how this process actually works. But yeah, it's not like what a lot of us were used to in college, where you're just reading the notes and then trying to memorize them. Like you're actually creating totally new pieces of work product, because the goal at the end is to have a test-taking tool that you can then walk into the test with. And it's the most efficient, effective like compilation and organization of your notes to be able to use it on the final exam. And so, and which we'll talk about in a second, which is most final exams are open book. And so, and caveat, even if they're not, you're still going to want to go through this process, but basically you're going to be able to walk in for most law schools with a hard copy of something, and you want that hard copy to be the most effective tool to be able to then write out your law school exam answer. If it doesn't make sense, let us know. Or if you're not totally convinced, let us know. I really do that in the opposite way. I tend to skip a lot of words when I read books. Oh, okay. Well, either way, don't worry about skipping words, guys, because it won't be about reading. It won't be about reading. The only time that you're, I guess, technically reading is the very, very first step, which is when you're reading through the cases for the first time. And if you don't have a perfect case brief out of the reading notes, that's totally fine, because you're going to have all these other elements to be able to fill in the gaps, mainly the class notes. The professor's going to tell you what the most important takeaways are. So don't worry. It might be generational. It might be generational, yeah. Okay, cool. So Angie, if there aren't any more questions on that, I'll go to number 3. Are we good on that one?
Yeah, I don't think that there's any more.
Okay, cool. And then, okay, so I know this one's controversial, guys, and if you feel strongly about what you're doing, just keep doing it. Like, do whatever feels good and right for you. I just want to show you guys the reasons that I think typing is beneficial, but you absolutely do not need to be convinced. You can keep going with whatever you're doing that's working for you. Number 3 is using flashcards, and this is pretty nuts. I keep hearing people that are recommending this. Maybe you guys haven't heard this, and that's awesome. But I am hearing this still quite a bit. And whether it's physical flashcards, like you're actually writing out on index cards, or there's like some programs online that will like flash information for you, this is not going to be the best use of your time, because the final exam that you're preparing for isn't about memorization. It's about application. And so, kind of like what we were talking about traditionally in college, and this is how I studied, and maybe this is how a lot of you guys study too, is you'll read the material, you'll take notes on the material, you'll try to memorize it as best as you can, and then you're going to present that material to the professor in some sort of written form, or multiple choice. But memorization is pretty key. And the sort of give you, for those of you who are in law school, you already know this, but for those of you who are heading in, you may have heard this, but final exams aren't going to be memorization. So for example, your professor's not going to ask you, okay, list all the names of the cases, list the dates that they were published, list the facts, list the legal rules. Like, they're not going to ask you kind of that in a memorization type format. Instead, they're going to ask you to apply everything you learned to a fact pattern. And so they're going to have this hypothetical fact pattern, and it's going to have a ton of people doing a ton of things to each other. And then at the end, there's usually going to be a very broad, open-ended question, something like, discuss all the legal issues raised in this fact pattern. Or sometimes they'll do it in a more pointed way. So they'll say, for example, if it's a civil procedure exam, they might say, does personal jurisdiction exist in this jurisdiction? Or if it's contract, was a contract formed, or something like that, where they're telling you the broader issue to talk about. but your job is still going to be to go through the facts and identify the facts that are relevant, the legal issues that are present, and then analyze those legal issues with respect to those facts based on everything you learned. And so when you're talking about flashcards, a lot of that is, okay, well, what are the baseline rules of, of causes of action? Like, what are the 4 elements of negligence? Or what are the elements of a contract? Or what do you need for personal jurisdiction? And so that stuff you're going to learn as you create your outlines and your canned answers and your practice exams. But I would not recommend using flashcards to just try to like flat out memorize them, because that's not what you're going to be asked to do. And if you are memorizing stuff, it's just the baseline stuff. So that's we're talking like C level stuff, like what are the elements of negligence, and we're shooting for A level stuff, like how would you apply the elements of negligence to a certain fact pattern. And so, and the other thing is, I guess it's slightly different for those of you who have midterms, but for those of you who have full-blown final exams once at the end of the semester, even if you wanted to try to memorize all the information, it would be impossible, because you're talking 6 classes, 4 months of material, and it's just not possible to do if you're not having like weekly quizzes and that's forming your grade. And the other thing that's really that I think that flashcards, really become obsolete for are your final exams that are open book. And I'm curious, like people who are currently in law school, how many of your exams are open book? Because literally every single exam in law school for me was open book. But I know that there are some law schools that have 1L closed book exams. So let us know if most of your exams were open book or if most of your exams were closed book. Angie, do you remember if all of yours were one way or the other?
There was really no standard anything. I had some.
Oh, really?
Open book, closed book. Some
you had both
all day. Like I had one that you took home and did over the weekend.
I had one take home. Yeah.
I had one that was literally like 60 multiple choice questions, and that was it. And
in 1L year or like later on too?
I think that was my second year.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the same for me. There was one class that did multiple choice my 2L year and my 3L year. There was one class that did a take home my 3L year, but my 1L year, everything was open book. And the thing with open book is that it means you can bring in any physical notes or your textbook, your outlines, your canned answers, whatever it is, into the exam with you. And so the reason that I'm not a big proponent of flashcards is because, again, with flashcards, you're learning the basics of the law. And if you can bring in your notes, then you have them literally sitting right next to you, and you can just look at them and type them as you physically are looking at them. And so
if you don't want to be like frantically flipping through flashcards in an exam, like that's just
and I think
gonna work.
Yeah, and I think the fear is that people are like, okay, well, I want to have stuff memorized so that when I get to the exam, I can just go ahead and type it from memory. But I guess what I would say is that if you go through all of these steps, you're going to implicitly memorize all of it. You're going to memorize it because, for example, like the elements of, baseline stuff like personal jurisdiction or negligence, you're just going to be using them over and over and over. And so you will memorize them. And so I wouldn't make flashcards or practice flashcards as a step in the study process, because
back to your point about trying to limit your world so that you're not doing things that aren't effective.
Exactly.
Like memorizing the rules aren't going to do you really jack anything. Like it's the application. Totally. Like you'll find like when you're writing exam questions that it's not how many people could remember all the rules. It's how did you apply the rules in your exam that sets you apart from the rest of the class.
Yeah.
So, like, the flashcards, memorizing the rules aren't going to do you all that much, and it's going to take up just an incredible amount of your time.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point is, law school is just as much about doing the right things as not doing the wrong things, because you only have 4 months to blow this final exam out of the water, and so it's just as important to sort of limit the things that aren't moving the needle forward as it is to focus on the things that are. And I think that is one of the trickiest things and the toughest things to do as a new law student, especially, is because you get inundated with so much information, and so many people have so many pieces of advice that they want to give you. And so it's tough. I think it's tough to delineate that sometimes. And so the goal of this presentation was to tell you the things that I keep hearing that I do not think move the needle forward, and definitely don't do it as efficiently as other tactics, other ways of studying, including cutting those out. So that's that's where I'm sort of coming from. I don't know if people, let me see if people said whether or not they have open book or closed book. Open book, if you have open book, does that include copy paste? No. So open book means that you have to have your physical notes printed out and physically sitting next to you, because the way, I don't know if you guys still use ExamSoft, but it's going to be basically some software tool that makes it impossible to access any other screen on your computer. And so the only thing that you're going to have access to is this like blank sort of Google Doc or Word doc. Like it's just blank. And then you have to type your answer into it. And so if you were typing anything from your notes, you are typing it verbatim. And which is also a good reason to do it really, really quickly. Did you find exams easier when they were open book? So, Angie, you can also like speak to this, but I think it's interesting. There's an interesting thing, because I think people assume that open book is going to be easier because obviously like you have notes sitting in front of you that you can bring in, but the problem is it's open book for everyone, right? And because you're graded on a curve, it's not just then the game becomes not just can I write down stuff from my notes, but can I use the notes that are physically sitting next to me and apply the legal issues better, and then also have a test taking tool that I can use faster than everybody else. Because if you're thinking of like creating an outline that's 200 pages and you're bringing that into your final exams, you are no way going to be able to flip through that outline anywhere nearly as fast as somebody who's walking in with a 20-page document. And so that's also like, it kind of just changes the strategy of the game a little bit. And then when you're talking about a closed book exam, it's sort of interesting because what I have found is that the closed book exams actually give you a bit of an advantage, because if you go through all of the 5 steps of the study process as if you were practicing for an open book exam, you're going to already create this like exam taking tool. And in the process of creating it is like how your brain is understanding and revisiting and reorganizing the information. And so when you sit down to a closed book exam, you're going to know it so much better than other people in the class, and they're also not going to have notes to be able to go by. And so you almost kind of have an advantage there. The only thing that I would say about closed book exams, the only additional step I would add for a closed book exam, and I was given this piece of advice, I think it's amazing, is to create a mnemonic device. And so because you can't have like a short checklist of the issues that might come up in an exam, I would recommend making a mnemonic device of the basically what you're able to remember. And so, for example, if you're talking about, one of the examples I give is like contract formation. So you have, offer acceptance, consideration, damages. So CODA, so either CODA becomes your mnemonic device, or like cows always drink orange juice, or something that you can remember. So as soon as you get that final exam, you flip it over, you write your mnemonic device down, what it means, and then you've basically created a short checklist for yourself as to like what issues to hit, which is something that is helpful if you don't have physical notes sitting next to you. But that's the only like slight tweak that I would make for closed book exams. I don't know. Hopefully that answers. So do you have to quote decision? What is the 5-step process you mentioned? Angie, I don't know if you feel, if that's how you took if you like did anything differently when you were studying for open book or closed book exams.
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah. Did you kind of go at it the same way?
Gosh, I have to like go back in time and remember. I think I did study in the same way, because it's like you said, like it's you trying to process the information as much as possible the way that you process it best, and preparing for it as if you're not going to have something in front of you is your best bet. Because then you're okay no matter what happens, right? Yeah. And then the other thing is, if you prepare that thoroughly, you can do exactly as you said and flip between your outline way faster. Like you'll remember, for at least my brain works in a weird way that like I'll remember like, oh yeah, when I was writing this, I think it was on page 15 or whatever. And so like you'll be able to just jump a lot faster. Totally. And so like that is your competitive advantage, is how well do you know your own notes, right? So I think you do want to prepare as if you don't have anything in front of you, and I always tabbed up my outline. So even though I bring an outline in, I would use tabs to say like, this is the major section, this is the major section. So like all your huge headings, your top line headings, for your outline, like I would tab all those so that you can easily flip back and forth,
Right.
Gotcha. I think it's way more effective to take the time to create a really good outline that you know really well, rather than taking a really big outline in there that you just sort of brain dumped into, because you're not going to be able to use that outline effectively.
Yeah, for sure. And then, Deborah, what was the 5-step process you mentioned? So the 5-step process is reading notes, class notes, outlines, canned answers, and practice exams. And so that's what I teach in the course that I teach. But you'll have, a lot of people will have heard at least some of those when you're heading into law school. The problem is that a lot of people will throw out terms like outlines or practice exams and then not really explain like what that is or how to do it, or like when you should do it, or how you should utilize it to move the ball forward and get you to where you want to be. So that's what's tough about like having this sort of inundation of information but not really told how to use it. But those are the 5 like high level steps. And speaking of outlines and practice exams, one of the biggest things...
We're already at 1, so just letting you know, we're running a little short on time, but
no. Okay. Well, so do we want to just give, like, I can give them the slides, or I can just quickly run through these, whichever one you want.
I mean, I have a little extra time. I can stick around if everybody else has time, but if you need to drop off, we can also circulate the slides afterwards.
Yeah. Totally. If you need to drop off, go for it. And then, I can definitely give these to Angie so you guys can have them after.
I just wanted to make sure we weren't cutting into other people's time too.
Yeah. Yeah. If people want to stick around, I'm fine sticking around, but if we want to cut it, I'm totally good with that too.
Let's keep going. Anybody who needs to leave can go ahead and leave. But let's keep going.
Okay. Cool. And so these last 2 go a little bit more quickly. So this one I would say is a piece of advice you hear a lot is to wait to outline or take practice exams until you quote unquote understand the material. And this is something that I absolutely did my first semester, which is, and it makes sense, right? Like the rationale is, well, why would I start to outline if I don't even understand the material? Like if I don't even know what I've been taught. And so what I did is I waited to outline until a month into law school, because, the way that they're teaching the material is sort of in chunks. So you'll have on your syllabus, again, let's say for civil procedure, you'll have a chunk that's all the cases having to do with personal jurisdiction, and then all the cases having to do with venue, and all the cases having to do with pleading standards. Like you'll have all these nuances that fall under those big headings, but you'll be taught in headings, generally speaking. And so my thought was, okay, well, let me wait until we at least finish a big heading or 2 big headings, and then I'll start to outline, because then I'll have, this context, or I'll understand it better or something like that. And the problem is, and the reason this is not awesome advice, is because you're not actually going to understand the material until you start working with it. So until you actually start going through the outlining process. And it's tough, because that's a really scary thing to do, is to sit down and try to identify the most critical elements of something that you don't fully understand. But the catch-22 is you're not going to understand it until you actually start going through it. And so one of the problems is, and I was definitely in this category when I first started out, is that you want to have this quote unquote context. Like you want to be able to have some sort of understanding of how these elements are playing into each other and how they all work together. And so you keep waiting to get that context. But the problem comes is that you run out of time. And so what winds up happening is that what a lot of people will tell you is you should wait, until like the very end of the semester. You should use outlining as quote unquote like studying for exams. You should use practice exams as studying for exams. And so you shouldn't do it until the last month of the semester or 2 weeks before the exam or something like that. And by that time, you've basically burned, 2/3 or 3/4 of the semester, having not started this stuff yet. And you've now limited your time. You've given yourself a very small window in which to synthesize the information. And the other thing that winds up happening is the same thing with practice exams. Like people get really, myself included, like the first semester, I did not take a practice exam until the day before the final. Like that is the first time I ever looked at a practice exam. I didn't even know what a law school exam looked like until that point, which is like crazy now that I think about it going back. But it makes sense too, because it's really intimidating. Like if you think about why would I sit down and take a practice exam? I don't even know the material yet. What good is that going to do me? But one of the things that, that I try to emphasize is that when you take practice exams, they're not about the substance, they're about the format, because there's a very specific strategy to taking final exams and to crafting a final exam answer. And so that is a skill set that you need to start practicing and learning early, like very early on in the semester, so that you're not just learning the substance, but you're learning how to communicate and apply the substance in a way that your professor is going to be looking for. And so what I recommend, and let me see if I have it on here. Yeah. But what I recommend is starting outlining the first week of class and then starting practice exams the fourth week of class. And so so basically Monday through Friday of the entire semester is going to be reading notes and class notes. And then outlining is going to start the very first week on the weekend. So you're going to do Saturday and Sundays outlining. And then you're going to count out 4 weeks and then do practice exams. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the fourth weekend, you'll take one of those weekend days and do a practice, and not a practice exam full blown, like not a 3-hour exam, but like a practice exam problem, like a one hypo that asks questions for each of your 5 classes that are going to be structured that way. And then you're going to do that every 4 weeks. And so at the end of the semester, you'll have done it 3 times before the study period starts. So before the final exam study period starts. And the awesome thing about that is if you start that early, then you will finish this entire process before the final exam study process starts. And then you can use that time to create your canned answers, which is the step that a lot of people skip, because what winds up happening is people will treat the outline as the study step. And so they won't start it until very late in the semester. And so that's like one of the biggest things I hear all the time is that people will, and I still hear it from law school administrators. They're like, yeah, like wait till the end. And then it burns like super valuable time that you could be using at the beginning of the semester.
I completely agree. I didn't even realize until literally like a week and a half before my final exams that the professors even put the final exams, their past exams, online.
Oh, no.
No, seriously, I was so lost. I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And I think I frantically tried to take like 3 exams in a row, like, in 3 days. And I just burned myself out like right before finals too. It was really bad. So, But the earlier that you can look at those, the better, because then you'll be able to know. And you know what? Go back and look at all of them, even if you don't take all of them, because you'll be able to see kind of the style of your professor, and you'll be able to notice topics that pop up all the time. So.
Yeah. And the thing about practice exams too that I think is tough is that most practice exams don't come with model answers. And so a lot of it, in a perfect world, you would have multiple practice exams from your professor, like actual previous exams the professor gave. You would have model answers showing what an A answer looks like. And then you would be able to compare, you'd be able to take them and then compare. But what winds up happening is a lot of professors won't give practice exams. In fact, I think one professor my entire 1L year gave us a previous test that he had given. Because, if you think about it from the professor's point of view, I definitely think they should give you at least one. But a lot of professors are very reluctant to do it because they teach the exact same material every single year. And so if they start giving you previous exams, then they're burning fact patterns that they can't use again. And then they have to like recreate them every single year. And so I get why they don't want to give them to you, but just so you know, like usually you're not going to get, if you get one, you're very lucky. If you get one with a model answer, that's like amazing gold. But most of the time you're going to have to access these some other way. And the problem was when I was in law school, there was no other way to access them. They weren't available online. You couldn't like check them out at the library or whatever. Like they just weren't available. And so we didn't have anything to study with.
Man, your professors were rough. I think every single one of my 1L professors posted their exams.
Did they?
And we had 3 professors that posted them for like every single year past. So they create a new one every single year. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like, yeah, if you guys can get that, like, definitely use that. You're in
my upper level classes weren't like that. It was like you said, like maybe we'd have one exam that we could look at. But my 1L classes, I think they try to find professors who really, really, really want to make that experience.
Good. And they should. Like those should be materials that are available. I don't like, what about, did they give you guys model answers? Because not only did we not get practice exams, but the one dude who gave us a practice exam, no model answer. Like there was no indication of how it should be answered.
They either gave us a model answer or they would hold study sessions where the TA would walk you through a model answer. Like
Guys,
they would tell you, how would I think about this while I was writing the exam? Even if they didn't give you a written one, they gave you
okay. Guys, if your professors offer that, 1000% go to those. That's incredible. If the people who are currently in law school, if any of you guys are still on, can you let us know if one, your professors gave you practice exams, and two, if they either like gave you model answers or gave you like some sort of like study session or some sort of like, this is how I would go about answering this question. Because those are the best resources coming like straight from the horse's mouth. If you guys can get those, that is fabulous. Okay, so cool. So wrapping it up with something very light. I know that was like some super intense studying techniques. But wrapping it up with something like one of the things that I think law school does not do a good enough job of, among other things, among not teaching you how to be a
gazillion other things.
Yeah, like, oh my gosh, it was so funny. There was a post on LinkedIn. I don't know if you guys follow Alex Sue, but if you don't, you definitely should. And his post was, if we were starting from scratch and creating law school and like crafting law school, how would you do it? Like, what would it look like? Because I sure as hell don't think it would look like reading 19th century cases with one final exam at the end of the semester that doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer.
I commented on that. My comment has like 23 likes.
I saw your comment. It was awesome. And it's just like, yeah, it's insane. Like there's no, like you can find substantive application pieces, but you have to go and look for them and you have to seek them out and you have to be proactive about them, as opposed to like a graduate degree that is supposedly teaching you and preparing you for this profession. So it's almost counter, like you have to go outside of the curriculum to like find these things that arguably they should be teaching you within the curriculum. So that's just that's a little bit of a rant. But one of the other things that they also, I think, could improve on is really emphasizing this importance in making connections with your classmates. Because if you think about business school, that's like not all they do, but like that's a huge portion of the purpose of going to business school, is being able to make these connections, because then you guys will be in the business world together and you'll be each other's clients and each other's like colleagues and things like that. Whereas in law school, that can definitely happen down the road, but I don't think that they emphasize how real that is and how realistic that can be. And law school is stressful and it's tough and it's time consuming, and you have your nose to the grind for a good chunk of it. And that's important, like you're putting a lot of time and a lot of money into getting a job. And because grades are the biggest, factor in getting that job, of course, like definitely I would recommend doing as well as you can. But I do think that there is time to at least like put names to faces and at least follow each other on social media, right? So if I know a lot of you guys are going into either remote or hybrid situations for law school. So if they have anything like, remote happy hours or a meet and greet or a Facebook group, like join that stuff, meet people. You guys are going through, it's a really cool time in your life to be going through a really intense experience all together, all at once. And those are the kinds of experiences that really craft lasting relationships, honestly, is like going through trauma together. It's like essentially what's happening. And so best case scenario, you come out with a few really lifelong friendships, honestly. And then worst case scenario, you follow each other on social media, and 5-10 years down the road, when you guys are partners and in-house, in-house incorporations and starting your own businesses, then you can connect with people to either find lateral positions or hire each other as like clients and attorneys. And so it's sometimes hard to think of yourselves as not being baby lawyers forever and eventually, moving up the ranks in these places, but it's going to happen. And I guarantee you that people prefer to work with people they at least kind of sort of know than like total strangers. And so if you're trying to apply for a position or you're trying to pitch a client, if they went to law school with you, you automatically have a connection, right? You automatically at least tangentially know each other. And so I would really encourage you guys to at least do baseline getting to know each other and thinking about the fact that even though a network doesn't necessarily seem really important right now, or you guys aren't in positions of power right now, in decision-making positions, you will be. Like you 100% will be eventually in your life. And so, meet people, introduce yourself, be cool, be a nice person. People remember. That's the other thing I think they emphasize a lot. But people remember jerks. Like I I remember people who were rude, and I remember people who I would definitely want to work with, you know? So just be one of those people. Don't take law school to such a serious level that people have a negative impression of you. So that would be my last piece of advice. So I don't know if you guys have any questions.
I think the other thing is, like, don't underestimate people. You know, like, people don't judge a book by its cover. You know, the people that you think are going to be number one in your class don't end up being number one in your class.
Yeah.
The people who brag about being at the top aren't necessarily always at the top. And so, like, there were a lot of people that I think did really, really well, and they were just flying in stealth mode, and they turned out to have these amazing jobs afterwards. I remember there was this one guy in our class who was, like, super quiet and never really spoke at anything, ended up, like, clerking for one of the courts of appeals for the federal circuit. And so, he ended up having these amazing connections. And, one day he reached out to me. After clerking, he went to a patent firm, and I was at a trademark firm. And he's like, you were one of the few people in law school that was actually nice to me. And he was like, I have this trademark matter that I really don't know what I'm doing. Like, and I was wondering if you could help.
That's fantastic.
Like, and I totally agree. I mean, I think that, those relationships that you build will last longer than you know. And it's never too early to start building those relationships. Yeah. So totally. I mean, that's going to be the hard part about doing this all remotely. Like, don't neglect your classmates. Reach out to people. And, people will remember that, hey, you were, like, the one person that, like, stepped out of, oh my gosh, all this COVID stuff is happening, and, poor me, and, like, actually stepped out of it and reached out and said, hey, how are you doing? What can I help with? And people remember that.
Yeah, and it's cool because I think some of the, just kind of looking back, when you're trying to make connections with people, I think the first question is like, well, what do we even talk about? Like, what do we have in common? What do we talk about? And what you don't realize is that just going through law school is just a treasure trove of conversation started, right? Like, I mean, like, just the fact that you guys are going through a shared experience together is endless, like, topics of conversation. Like, how do you feel about it? What have you done to prepare? Like, who do you have as professors? Like, what do you think you want to maybe do when you graduate? Just, I mean, if you're talking about, like, small talk and getting things started, it's so easy, as opposed to not having a shared experience and just reaching out randomly with somebody online. Think of that as, like, the counterpoint. And then you'll realize, oh my gosh, of course, we're going to the same law school. We're both in the same great, like, level of, we have a ton
and don't forget the upperclassmen. Like, you won't have that many chances to interact with them, but the upperclassmen are key. They can give you outlines. They can tell you how the classes went. They can do so much for you. I mean, like, I had a lot of friends that were upperclassmen who, they were like, oh yeah, after I leave my clerkship, somebody needs to come along behind me. You want me to push you through to the partner? And I'm like, yes, like.
And you had awesome connections. I didn't have anybody like, no, but.
Well, because I didn't have the grades. Like, I was the opposite of you. So I didn't have the right grades at first. So I knew I had to be out there networking my butt off. So, like, I think that's my piece of advice. Everybody, of course, wants to be at the top of the class. Sure. Bust your ass like you're going to be at the top of the class. But if you're not at the top of the class, you know what you should be doing? You should be building those relationships, because somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody that's actually going to know you're a cool person that's going to get you that job if you don't have the grade.
No, definitely. Like, 1L a year is the most powerful year for a grade. So, like, bust your ass, do everything you can to get the highest grades you possibly can, and then reevaluate after 1L year, I would say, and just see, like, or, where in the class are you falling? And then, there's definitely a switch to, like, okay, for me to get a grade, there's certain positions that'll say, like, you have to be in the top 10%, or you have to be in the top 25%, or you have to be in the top third. And then the strategy switches, right? You're like, okay, if I'm not in the top third, these are the steps that I now need to take in order to set myself up for a position or make connections. And one of the things that Angie and I were talking about, which is so cool, is that what winds up happening is the people at the very top of the class usually will go through the 2L fall OCI process, usually will get job offers with big law firms, and the people who don't wind up having to develop these skills that are crazy useful for your entire career. And so, like, networking, building connections, making, learning how to present yourself or market yourself is stuff that comes in really, really useful down the road as well. And the people who never had to go through that then have to learn it later in time. and they haven't had as many reps or as much practice with it. So definitely don't worry if you're not at the top of the class after 1L year. You can definitely still get a job, and you can start developing these strengths and exercising these strengths that other people might not even touch for like 5 years, you know.
But again, if you're at the top of the class, don't coast. Like, hey, just because you
No.
got that good cushy job for the summer, next summer, doesn't mean that you're going to have something after graduation. So,
Or that you want it,
don't
right?
coast.
Yeah.
Like, after
Yeah.
you get that cushy job, this is not your time to be like, oh, great, me, I'm awesome, and not do
Yeah.
anything at all. Like, no, this is your time to now be like, okay, that's out of the way, but I need to use that, opportunity to my advantage and make as many connections as I can through that opportunity, really exploit that opportunity for everything that it is. And then also keep connecting with attorneys on the side. Keep doing all the networking. Keep talking to your fellow students and doing all of that. If you alienate yourself because you're like, oh, I'm hot shit, that's not going to serve you well at all.
No, and what winds up happening, what people don't realize is that, like, even if you were to get a job offer through 2L OCI, one, you may not get a permanent offer. That's always a possibility. It's rare, but it does happen. Two, you may not like the firm, so you may be now in a position where you have to try for a job your 3L year or post law school. And then the other thing to keep in mind is that the stats are just so high on turnover from law firms. So we're talking almost 50% switch law firms or leave their law firms in the first 3 years, and 80% leave in 5 years. And so you are going to be statistically looking for a job again very soon. And so, yeah, exactly, echoing everything you just said, like, make sure you're taking the steps to continue to build yourself and your career so that you're in a position to be able to do that.
Yeah, because I had a friend that did go through the normal OCI, got a major BigLaw job, got everything that they were supposed to out of their summer associate. They got their offer for after graduation, everything. Then they ended up hating the firm in the first year, and I was the opposite. I was having to like hustle to try to get a job because I did not have all those opportunities. And then, I already had a huge network by like my first or second year, and so I was having to use my network to help him find something, so like I was like, you should have been out there doing this, but
totally.
But yeah, you'd be surprised.
They're both important skill sets to learn, but I think it's a good point that you shouldn't isolate either one. That you should definitely, I know it's tough to say like, oh, do everything, but I guess what I would say is if I had to choose, I would say 1L year, disproportionately focus on your grades. Like, do the best you can to get the top grades that you can. And then after 1L year, we can start, like reevaluating and seeing, okay, where are you in the class and what should the priorities be now and how should you use your time? That's what I would recommend.
And spend your time now up to 1L year doing all the networking stuff, because you can still do that right out of the gate. There's nothing really all that different about you being not in the law school yet and all of a sudden being in law school. Like 1Ls know just as little as people who, literally just took the LSAT. So I think as relationship building goes, you could start doing that relationship building now when you have the time during the summer. And if you're wondering what in the world I should be doing to prepare for law school, like do that, learn what a law school class looks like, figure out what it's like to take notes, things like that. Take Angela's course, and then, you'll be set to go. So.
Yeah, and guys, if your question is, how do I go about networking on social media? The answer is to go to Angie's virtual legal career bootcamp that is starting next week and is going to be amazing. And has like networking sessions, breakout sessions, substantive information sessions. So that's step one. Yeah. That's how you start this process.
Oh, Barbara asked if you could talk a little bit more about your course.
Yeah, so I'm actually launching it right now. The doors close on Friday, and it's basically an all-in-one course to prepare you for a successful career in law school. So it's called the Law School Master Plan, and it's a strategy course. So it teaches you how to prepare going in. It teaches you how to use your time to study to get top grades. It teaches you how to go through the OCI and the application and the interviewing process to make yourself the most irresistible candidate you possibly can to legal employers. And then it finishes with a module on how to prepare yourself for your first legal career and how you're successful and how you continue to build. And so it's an all-in-one. The idea is so that you have everything that you need to go through every stage of your legal career. So yeah, so I'm really excited about it.
Amazing, and I wish I had that because I wouldn't have been so freaking lost.
And that's the thing is, like, I created it because I was like, oh my God, like I would have loved this when I was starting law school. Like if somebody had just told me these things, I would have had a plan. I would have known what to do, what to expect, how to be awesome. You know, like that was like the impetus for creating it. Is like, man, this would have been so key like 12 years ago.
Right? If only we could go back in time and meet us.
Yeah. Just like not so many sleepless nights. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Angela, for all of your time. Is it okay if they connect with you on Instagram or LinkedIn or whatever?
Totally. Okay, yeah, awesome. Definitely. You
want to drop all your links in the chat box?
It's all Angela Vorpahl stuff. So let me do, Instagram is easy. Just add Angela Vorpahl. And then LinkedIn is LinkedIn Angela Vorpahl. It's like whatever the LinkedIn link is. Here, let me see if I can get out of here. And then I'll send you guys all my social media. LinkedIn.com/
Thank you for everybody that stuck around. I know we went pretty
guys.
far. So
you guys have
I'm glad that you guys are here.
Yeah, this is LinkedIn. Here's YouTube in case anybody wants YouTube.
You've got all the things.
The good thing about having like a kind of bizarre last name, which I'm sure you can also appreciate, is that nobody has taken your links. Which is like
nobody's ever taken
nobody has this name anywhere, which is cool.
I do have problems though where
your name is
like
so
your
awesome,
name.
By the way. Like can you pronounce it one more time? Because I always hesitate to pronounce it because I always know I'm going to do it wrong.
So it's Vishianan. The DA on the end is an immigration.
Oh, am I on mute?
That they wouldn't fix. Oh wait, can you hear me? Oh wait, what happened?
Oh no!
We're hearing your YouTube channel in the back.
I lost you. Wait.
Oh no!
Oh, and
there. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So my last name.
I had muted the channel. Okay, sorry. Go.
Good. It's Vishianan, so the DA on the end is silent. It's just an immigration mistake they wouldn't fix for my parents.
Vishianan.
So,
oh my God.
Vishianan. It's actually a lot easier than it looks. But I actually do have the problem where, like, anytime that I have to make a username or something, like, my name's actually too long, and it kicks it back, and it's like, no, your username's too long. I'm like,
oh.
Yeah.
That is so insensitive.
But I'm sure you went through the same thing with a V last name. You're always at the end of every list ever. You know, when you're in grade school and they're like, we're going to line you up by last name, you're all the way at the end.
Yeah, man. I remember those days.
Yeah, graduation day when you have to listen to everyone go in front of you.
Yeah.
At the end.
And then, I mean, they actually, so it was really nice. I assume they did this with graduation for YouTube, but they ask you for the phonetic spelling so that they pronounce it correctly. So that was like the one time in my entire life where somebody actually pronounced it right because they asked before. So that
still didn't. Mine, even my law school one, she just gave up. She went halfway through the card and she was like, Angie.
Angie, we're so proud of you, Angie. Like, give it up for Angie. Yeah.
Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you so much for everything. If
Thanks,
you need
guys.
anything, please feel free to connect with us. And we will have 2 more meetups next week, but I am not doing any more meetups during the actual boot camp event because I might go insane.
Boot camp's gonna be awesome.
So next week we'll have 2 more, but then after that we'll be taking a break. So, alrighty.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Angie.
Bye.
Bye.